Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back, way back, to a time when the clatter of a wooden spoon against an iron pot was the most consistent sound in your life. We're stepping into the muddy, calloused shoes of a medieval peasant to understand what it truly meant to eat. You find yourself in a low-roofed, smoke-filled hut. The air thick with the smell of damp earth, burning peat, and something perpetually simmering. It's a world away from instant noodles and takeout menus. Frankly, if your modern palate is accustomed to the delicate balance of herbs and spices, or even just the basic concept of consistent refrigeration, let's just say your chances of enjoying this culinary journey are slim. But survival was the only Michelin star that mattered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a pleasure to see who's tuning in, so feel free to post your location and what time it is where you are. It creates a nice sense of our little global community, all settling in for the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins not with the chime of an alarm, but with a subtle shift in the darkness and the persistent ache in your lower back. The straw-stuffed mattress on the floor has done little to soothe the rigors of yesterday's labor in the Lord's fields. Before your eyes are fully adjusted to the gloom, a duty calls, one that is as much a part of your morning ritual as the sunrise itself. You move towards the center of your single-room home, towards the hearth. It isn't a grand stone fireplace, but a simple clay or packed earth circle where embers from last night's fire still glow with a faint, sleepy orange. Suspended above it by a thick iron chain is the real heart of your home, the cauldron. This isn't a shiny copper pot from a chef's kitchen. It is a beast of black iron, stained with the soot of 1,000 fires and the ghosts of 1,000 meals. It is your most valuable possession, aside from perhaps your single change of woolen tunic or the tools you use to work the land. And inside this cauldron is your past, your present, and your future, all bubbling together in a thick, slow-moving stew. This is pottage. You reach for a long, wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth by the grip of your hands, your mother's hands, and perhaps her mother's before her. You plunge it into the pot and stir. The contents move with a lazy, thick resistance. It's a homogeneous slurry of browns and greens, its surface reflecting the dim light from the doorway. The smell that rises is not altogether unpleasant, but it is deeply, primordially earthy. It smells of soil and grain, of boiled roots and smoke. There might be a slightly sour undertone, a faint tang of fermentation from the days it has spent simmering. This pot is never truly empty. It is a living, evolving entity. The foundation of this endless meal is grain, not the fluffy, polished rice or quick-cooking oats you might imagine. Your grain is coarse, tough, and stubborn. Most days, it's barley. You see the pearled grains, plump and chewy, suspended in the thick liquid. Sometimes it's oats, which cook down into a more uniform, glutinous mass. On a truly difficult day, it might be rye, a grain that lends a dark color and a slightly sour, dense quality to the stew. These are not just for texture, they are the caloric engine of your life. They provide the raw energy needed to plow a field from sunup to sundown, to scythe hay until your muscles scream, to live a life of constant, grinding physical exertion. You ladle some water from a wooden bucket into the pot to thin out what has thickened overnight. The water itself is a precious commodity, hauled from the village well or a nearby stream, and always carrying the risk of sickness. This is a primary reason why the pottage is kept constantly simmering. The heat kills many of the invisible dangers lurking in the water, making the stew a safer source of hydration than a direct drink from the bucket. With the fire stoked and the pottage murmuring, your attention turns to today's additions. This is what makes the pottage endless. It's not that the same batch has been cooking since the Norman conquest, but that it's a continuous cycle of consumption and replenishment. Yesterday's uneaten portion forms the base for today's meal. Your task now is to forage for what will supplement it. You step out of your hut into the damp morning air. The village is slowly coming to life, the smoke from other hearths painting lazy gray strokes against the sky. Your small garden plot, the Toft, behind your cottage is your first stop. Here you might have some hardy greens. Cabbage, perhaps, or kale. You pull a few of the tough, outer leaves, the ones the caterpillars have been feasting on. Nothing is wasted. You check on the onions and leeks. Their green shoots a vibrant slash of color against the brown earth. You pull one. Its pungent smell sharp and welcome. These will not just add bulk, but precious flavor to the bland, starchy canvas of the grain. But the garden is rarely enough. The real hunt is for the free food, the wild bounty of the commons, the woods, and the hedgerows. You're wild to table. Foraging app is just your own rumbling stomach and a vague memory of what your grandmother told you won't kill you. Usually, in spring, this is a time of relative plenty. You'd look for the tender green shoots of young nettles, carefully picked to avoid their sting, which, when boiled, lose their venom and provide a taste similar to spinach, rich in iron. You might find wild garlic, its pungent aroma a luxurious addition, or the young leaves of dandelions. Later in the year, it's wild sorrel for its sharp, lemony tang, or a common weed, as fat hen, which is nutritious and plentiful. You gather your findings in a small basket or bundled in a piece of cloth. Each handful is a small victory against the monotony of your diet. Back at the hut, you rinse the greens as best you can in a basin of water, picking out any insects or excess dirt, and chop them coarsely with your knife, another of your few precious tools. Everything goes into the pot. The fresh greens wilt almost instantly, their bright color darkening as they join the stew. The onion is sliced and tossed in, its aroma briefly cutting through the earthy base smell before melding with it. You stir it all together. The pottage is now today's pottage, slightly different from yesterday's, and slightly different from what it will be tomorrow. The concept of 3 distinct meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, is a luxury you can't afford. You eat when you can, and the pottage is always ready. Your first meal of the day is a ladleful of this stew, eaten from a rough earthenware or wooden bowl. You might not even have a spoon for every person. Often, you'll use a piece of heavy bread to scoop up the thick mixture. This first meal is taken quickly, standing by the fire, before you head out to the fields. It's fuel, plain and simple. As you work through the long day, the thought of that pot back in your hut is a constant, grounding presence. The lord of the manor, whose land you work as a serf, might be dining on roasted swan and spiced pies, but your world is anchored by that single, bubbling cauldron. The very system of your agriculture is designed to feed this pot. The fields are organized under a 3-field system of crop rotation, a mainstream agricultural practice that defined the era. One field would be planted in autumn with winter wheat or rye, a second field planted in spring with barley, oats, or, crucially, legumes like peas and beans. And the third field would be left fallow to recover its fertility and be used for grazing. This system ensured a more reliable and varied harvest, providing the very grains and pulses that form the core of your pottage. It was a simple but revolutionary idea that increased food security and slowly began to lift Europe out of the so-called Dark Ages. When you return at dusk, bone-weary and splattered with mud, the smell of the pottage greets you like an old friend. It has been simmering all day, a low-maintenance companion. Perhaps your wife or one of the older children has tended the fire and added more to the pot. A handful of dried peas that have been soaking, or a few small, knobbly carrots pulled from the garden. Now, in the evening, you will have your main meal. The family gathers around the fire, the single source of light and heat. The pottage is ladled out again. It's thicker now, the day's additions having cooked down. The grains are softer, the flavors more deeply mingled. You eat in near silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the crackle of the fire. What does it taste like, really? Imagine the saddest, most unseasoned bowl of oatmeal you've ever seen. Now add some boiled cabbage and the faint taste of dirt. Now leave it on the stove for 3 days. We're getting close. The predominant flavor is the grain itself, nutty barley or bland oats. The secondary flavors are the vegetables, the slight bitterness of the greens, the sweetness of a carrot or parsnip if you're lucky. Salt is an expensive luxury, often controlled by the Lord, so your food is perpetually undersalted. The real flavor powerhouse, if you have it, is a scrap of something fatty, a piece of bacon rind, a spoonful of lard, or the precious fat from boiled mutton bones. This fat adds a savory depth and richness that transforms the meal from mere subsistence to something bordering on satisfying. It also adds vital calories, helping to insulate you against the cold. Sometimes, for a bit of excitement, you might add a touch of verjuice. This is a wonderfully quirky tidbit from the period. Verjuice is the highly acidic, sour juice pressed from unripe grapes, crab apples, or other sour fruit. It was the medieval peasant's answer to lemon juice or vinegar. A small splash of this in the pottage would cut through the starchy blandness with a sharp, bright tang, waking up the palate. It was a simple way to add complexity to a one-note dish, using something that would otherwise be considered waste. But what about the endless part? This is where modern sensibilities and historical reality collide. The idea of a stew lasting for weeks on end, with new ingredients constantly being added, is a potent and romantic image of medieval life. And for some, it may have been close to the truth. A constantly simmering pot, kept above the danger zone for bacterial growth, could theoretically be maintained for long periods. The high temperature would kill off most pathogens, and the constant replenishment would cycle the ingredients. Your modern health inspector would have a full-blown meltdown, of course, imagining a petri dish of unimaginable horrors. But in a world without refrigeration, keeping food hot was one of the few preservation methods available. However, historians still argue whether the so-called perpetual stew was a literal, weeks-long reality for most peasants or more of a romanticized concept, with pots being more frequently cleaned than the legends suggest. It's likely the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The pot was probably not scrubbed clean every day. That would be a waste of precious fuel, and the flavorful, nutrient-rich stock at the bottom. But it's also unlikely that a single continuous stew lasted for months. It would more likely be a cycle of a few days, maybe a week, before the pot was scraped out, cleaned with sand and water, and a new dynasty of pottage was begun. The principle, however, remains the same. It was a continuous, evolving, all-encompassing feature of your culinary life. The character of your pottage would be a direct reflection of your wealth, or lack thereof. A poor widow or a family struggling after a bad harvest would have thin pottage. This would be watery, mostly grain with perhaps a few foraged weeds. It would fill the stomach but offer little in the way of true nourishment. You would feel a gnawing hunger even after eating a full bowl. On the other hand, a more prosperous peasant, perhaps a freeman with more land, or the village reeve, would have thick pottage. Theirs would be dense with grain, packed with vegetables from a well-tended garden, and, crucially, it would likely contain more protein. This might be in the form of peas and beans, but also scraps of meat or fish, a bit of salted pork, the remains of a boiled chicken, or even the head and bones of a fish could be thrown into the pot, their flavor and nutrients leaching out into the stew over hours of slow cooking. To have a thick pottage was a sign of security. It meant you had enough to eat today and a good base for tomorrow's meal. The very color of the pottage tells a story. White pottage, or leche pottage, was a slightly more refined version, often made with milk or almond milk, a surprising medieval staple, though more for the wealthy, and lighter ingredients like chicken or veal. This was food for the convalescing or the gentry. Your pottage is almost always dark. It is black pottage, colored by the dark grains, the tough outer leaves of cabbage, the blood from a piece of meat, and the soot from the fire itself. It is the color of the earth you toil in all day. As the evening wears on, the fire dies down to embers once more. The cauldron is topped up with a little more water, ready for the morning. The cycle is set to repeat. You and your family curl up on your straw mattresses. The faint, familiar smell of the simmering stew perfuming the air in your small home. It's the last thing you smell before you fall into an exhausted sleep, and it will be the first thing that greets you upon waking. The pottage is more than just food. It is the rhythm of your life, the anchor of your household, a constant, bubbling presence in a world of uncertainty and hardship. It is the great equalizer in your village. Everyone, from the reeve to the poorest cotter, eats some version of it. It is the taste of survival itself, bland, repetitive, yet absolutely essential. Your world hangs by the chain that holds that pot over the fire. That simmering pot of pottage is the constant, the liquid heart of your sustenance. But it is rarely consumed alone. It needs a partner, a vehicle, something solid to give it structure and to make it feel like a true meal. As you dip your wooden spoon into your morning bowl, your other hand reaches for the second great pillar of your diet. You pick up a thick, heavy slice from the large, dark loaf sitting on the simple wooden plank that serves as your table. This is your bread, and in many ways, this bread is even more important than the pottage. It is the very staff of your life, the dense, chewy, and utterly essential foundation upon which your survival is built. It will provide more than 60% of your daily calories, a staggering reliance on a single foodstuff. The loaf does not look like anything from a modern bakery. It is a rustic, rugged behemoth, round and dark brown, with a crust that feels less like a delicate shell and more like a protective armor. Tearing a piece off requires a surprising amount of effort from your wrist and fingers. The crumb inside is not light and airy, but dense, moist, and substantial. The color is a grayish-brown, flecked with darker specks of bran. The smell is wholesome and slightly sour, a testament to the living starter used to leaven it. This is not bread as an accompaniment. This is bread as the main event. Your journey with this bread began long before this morning. It started in the fields, under the same sun that bakes the earth in your own skin. The grain you use is not the prized, pale wheat that the lord of the manor demands for his own table. His bread, the fine white pandamain, is a symbol of status, made from flour so pure it's almost like dust. Your bread is born of necessity and hardiness. It's made from rye, a tough, resilient grain that can thrive in the poor, sandy soil of your allotted strips of land. Or it's made from barley, the same grain that thickens your pottage. Often, it's a mixture of wheat and rye grown together in the same field, a practice known as growing maslin. This was a form of agricultural insurance. If a wet summer caused the wheat crop to fail, the hardier rye would likely survive, ensuring you didn't starve. After the harvest, a portion of the grain you've worked so hard to grow must be taken to the Lord's mill to be ground into flour. This is not a choice. It is a legal obligation. This is part of the system of banalités, or banal rights, a cornerstone of feudal life. The Lord has the monopoly on certain essential services, and you are required by law to use his mill, his wine press, and his oven. And, of course, you must pay for the privilege. You watch as the miller, a man often viewed with suspicion and resentment by the peasantry, measures out your grain. He takes a portion as his fee. The mulcher. You watch him closely, as millers have a notorious reputation for taking more than their fair share, their thumbs supposedly pressing down on the scales. The origin of the old saying, "An honest miller has a golden thumb." The flour you receive back is nothing like the silky, uniform powder of today. It is a coarse, gritty meal. The millstones, huge, heavy wheels of rock, grind the grain, but they also grind themselves down in the process, leaving fine stone dust in your flour. This grit will find its way into your bread, and over a lifetime of chewing, it will slowly but surely wear down your teeth. The flour is also whole meal in the truest sense. Nothing is sifted out. The bran, the germ, every part of the grain is present, which makes the bread nutritious but also dark, heavy, and a bit tough on the digestion. Back in your hut, the process of making the dough begins. You don't have convenient packets of dried yeast. Your leavening agent is a living culture, a sourdough starter known as a leavener chief. It's a bubbling, tangy mixture of flour and water, teeming with wild yeasts and bacteria captured from the air. It's a piece of last week's dough, saved and fed, a culinary heirloom passed from mother to daughter or shared amongst neighbors. You mix a scoop of this precious starter with your coarse flour, some water or weak ale, and a touch of salt if you can spare it. Now comes the hard physical work. Kneading this low hydration, heavy dough is a workout. You put your back and shoulders into it, pushing, folding, and turning the dense mass on a floured wooden board. The goal isn't to develop delicate gluten strands for a light, airy crumb. The goal is to combine the ingredients thoroughly and build enough structure to hold the loaf together. In lean times, this is where the stretching of resources becomes critical. Flour is precious. To make it last longer, you'll mix in extenders. Ground dried peas or beans are a common addition, boosting the protein content but also making the bread even denser. In better times, you might add crushed nuts. But in the truly desperate months before the spring harvest, known as the hungry gap, the additions become more grim. You might resort to grinding up acorns, which have to be leached in water first to remove their bitter tannins. And in the darkest times of famine, stories abound of people resorting to desperate measures. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of things like bark and sawdust in bread during famines was a widespread survival tactic or an exaggerated horror story told by later chroniclers to emphasize the severity of the times. But the fact that such stories were told at all speaks volumes about the constant, looming threat of starvation. The idea of padding out your family's single food source with tree bark is a humbling and terrifying thought. Your request for a gluten-free option at this stage would likely be met with a blank stare, followed by you being handed a turnip and told to get on with it. Once your dough is kneaded into a large, tight ball, it needs to be baked. But your simple hut has no oven. An oven is a complex, fuel-hungry structure, a significant fire hazard in a village of wood and thatch cottages. Only the manor house and perhaps a monastery would have a private one. For you and the rest of the villagers, there is another trip to be made, another feudal obligation to be met, the communal village oven. Once a week, usually on a set day, the great oven is fired up. It's a large, dome-shaped structure of brick or stone, and heating it requires a vast amount of wood or peat, far more than any single family could afford. Carrying your heavy, unbaked dough, you join the procession of other women and children heading to the oven. The area around it is a hub of activity, a center for village gossip and social interaction. The air is thick with wood smoke and the glorious, promising smell of baking bread. It's a moment of community, a shared ritual that binds you to your neighbors. Of course, this too comes at a price. You must pay the Lord's baker, the fournier, for the use of the oven. The fee might be a small coin, or more likely, a piece of your dough, which the baker will combine with others to make his own loaves. To ensure you get your own loaf back from the cavernous, fiery maw of the oven, each family has a unique mark. You might press a token with a family symbol into the dough, or make a specific pattern of slashes on the top with your knife. You hand your precious dough over to the baker, who uses a long wooden paddle called a peel to slide it deep into the oven's hot belly, alongside dozens of other loaves. While you wait, you might hear tales and news. Who is sick? Whose daughter is to be wed? What the reeve said about the state of the fences. It's here you might also see the origins of a quaint modern phrase, the baker's dozen. The assize of bread and ale, a series of laws first introduced in 13th century England, was designed to regulate the price, weight, and quality of bread and ale. The penalties for a baker found to be selling short-weight loaves were severe. They could be fined heavily or even put in the pillory, a wooden frame in the public square where they would be subjected to scorn and abuse. To avoid any chance of accidentally falling foul of this law, bakers would often throw in an extra loaf for every dozen sold, ensuring the total weight was correct. That 13th loaf was their insurance policy, a quirky tidbit born from a very real fear of public humiliation. After what seems like an eternity, the baker begins to pull the finished loaves from the oven. The air fills with the rich, nutty aroma of baked rye and barley. You identify your loaf by its mark and pay your fee. The loaf you receive back is magnificent. It is huge, often weighing several pounds, with a crust so thick and hard it's almost black in places. You carry it home, a warm, heavy promise of security for the week ahead. This one loaf has to last your entire family for 7 days. The first day is a celebration. The bread is at its best. The crust is crisp, the inside is moist and chewy, and the flavor is rich and satisfying. You eat it with relish, tearing off great hunks and savoring the simple pleasure. But as the week progresses, the bread begins its slow decline. By day 3, it's losing its moisture. The crust is less crisp and more tough. The inside is firm and dry. By day 5, it's becoming genuinely hard. By day 7, your loaf has the density of a cinder block and could probably be used to patch a hole in the wall. A very, very small hole. This increasing hardness dictates how you eat it. The fresh bread of the first day can be eaten on its own. The slightly stale bread of midweek is perfect for dipping into your pottage, where it acts like a sponge, soaking up the broth and becoming soft and flavorful again. This is the sop, and for many, the bread and the pottage are inseparable parts of a single dish. You don't simply eat stew with bread, you eat stew on bread and through bread. This practice evolves into another fascinating medieval culinary custom, the trencher. In a wealthier household, and sometimes even in your own on a special occasion, a thick, flat slice of day-old bread would be used as a plate. You would place your meat or other foods directly onto the trencher. The bread would absorb all the juices, gravies, and fats, preventing them from being wasted on a wooden platter. After the main food was eaten, you could then consume your plate, now saturated with savory flavors. It's the original edible dish, the ultimate in reducing waste. More often than not, however, these soaked trenchers would be gathered up and given as alms to the poor waiting at the gates, or thrown to the dogs. For you, though, even the trencher itself is a valuable source of calories. By the end of the week, when the loaf is rock hard, it's almost inedible on its own. You have to find ways to soften it. You might toast it by the fire until it's brittle enough to crumble into your pottage or a bowl of ale. You might pour hot water over it to make a simple panada. No crumb is wasted. The bread is too hard-won, too precious. From the back-breaking labor of the harvest to the nervous transaction at the mill and the weekly ritual at the communal oven, every step is a reminder of its value. This dark, dense loaf is the symbol of your station in life. You see the Lord and his family with their delicate white bread, and, the chasm that separates your worlds. Bread is not just food. It's a visible, edible marker of the rigid social hierarchy. The finer the flour, the higher the status. Your bread is the bread of the earth. It is filled with the grit of the millstone and the strength of the rye that endures the harsh weather. It is heavy because your life is heavy. It is coarse because your life is coarse. But it is also reliable and sustaining. It is the food that gets you through the day, the week, the year. It sits in your stomach like a warm stone, a bulwark against the hunger that is never truly far away. As you drift off to sleep, you are not dreaming of fluffy pastries, but of the simple, profound security of a full loaf on the table and a simmering pot on the hearth. The security you feel with a full loaf on the table and a thick pottage bubbling over the fire is a fragile thing. It is a temporary peace in a life defined by uncertainty. That peace can be shattered by 100 different calamities: a rainstorm that flattens your barley, a blight that withers your peas, a fever that lays you low during the crucial harvest. Slowly, you watch your resources dwindle. The sack of rye flour feels lighter each time you reach into it. The salted bacon you were curing in the rafters is down to its last fatty rind. The pottage in the pot gets thinner each day, the ratio of water to substance shifting ominously. This is the hungry gap, that perilous time in late winter and early spring when last year's stores are gone and this year's have yet to arrive. And when the bread is gone and the pottage has become a watery ghost of its former self, you arrive at the meal of last resort. You arrive at gruel. Gruel is not pottage. To call it that would be an insult to the memory of those hearty, sustaining stews. Pottage is a meal. Gruel is a biological negotiation. It is the absolute minimum required to keep the machinery of the body from shutting down entirely. It is what you eat when you have nothing left but a handful of meal and a pot of water. It is the taste of desperation. You stand over the fire, but there is no pleasant foraging trip this morning, no satisfying kneading of dough. Your actions are spare, born of scarcity. You take a small wooden scoop and reach into the bottom of the grain chest. You scrape together the last of the oat flour, a pathetic, dusty pile in the palm of your hand. There are specks of chaff in it, maybe even a dormant weevil or two. You don't care. You pour the flour into the cauldron, which now seems mockingly large and empty. Then you add water, a lot of water. You stir the mixture with your wooden spoon, and it barely changes color, remaining a pale, translucent gray. As it heats, it thickens, but only slightly, achieving the consistency of watery paint. There are no onions to add flavor, no foraged greens to add vitamins, no sliver of fat to add richness. There is only grain and water. The finished product is ladled into a bowl. It is thin, slick, and almost gelatinous. A few sad, lumpy islands of congealed flour float in a sea of cloudy water. The smell is faint, almost non-existent, just the ghost of wet grain. And the taste, the flavor profile is best described as wet. It's the culinary equivalent of a damp, gray afternoon. It's insipid, a watery blandness that coats your tongue without offering any satisfaction. It is warm, and that is its primary virtue. The warmth spreads through your belly, a fleeting comfort against the cold of the hut and the deeper chill of hunger, but it provides little substance. It contains just enough calories to fuel the deep sense of disappointment you feel while eating it. The feeling of fullness it provides is a lie, a watery illusion that vanishes within the hour, leaving the familiar, dull ache of true hunger behind. This is not a light option you choose for a diet. This is what happens when the diet chooses you, and it's not a forgiving one. Eating gruel is a psychological burden as much as a physical one. It is an admission of failure. It means you are on the edge. Every watery spoonful is a reminder that the harvest is still weeks away, that your children are looking at you with hollow eyes, that your ability to work in the fields is waning with your strength. Gruel is the food of the vulnerable. When one of your children falls ill, burning with fever, this is what you prepare. Their throat is sore, they cannot face solid food, and they need hydration. You sit by their side, patiently spooning the warm, slick liquid into their mouth. In this context, the gruel feels different. It is an act of care, a gentle offering. Its blandness and digestibility, which feel like a curse when you are healthy, become a blessing for the sick. It is one of the few things an invalid body can tolerate. You watch them swallow, praying that this meager offering will be enough to sustain their fight. This association with sickness is profound. Even the wealthy, when they fell ill, would be prescribed a form of gruel. Of course, their version would be unrecognizable to you. A fascinating fringe tidbit of medieval cuisine is the coddle, a sort of luxury gruel. A nobleman's physician might order a coddle made from fine oat or almond milk. Yes, almond milk was a common feature in wealthy medieval kitchens, used especially during Lenten fasts when dairy was forbidden. This thin gruel would then be fortified and flavored with expensive ingredients, strong wine or ale, spoonfuls of honey or sugar, and a dusting of precious spices like cinnamon or ginger. It was served warm and steaming, a comforting, nourishing drink for a new mother after childbirth or for a lord recovering from a bout of illness. The gulf between your watery flour and water gruel and a lord's spiced almond milk coddle is as wide as the social chasm that separates your entire lives. Both are called gruel, but one is a medicine of comfort, and the other is a food of pure survival. Beyond the sick, gruel is the daily bread of the truly destitute. The landless laborer, the widow with no sons to work her plot, the family whose cottage burned down. They might subsist on thin gruel provided by the parish or a local monastery as a form of charity. It is the food of the beggar's bowl. It also has a surprising place in the world of the pious. In the stone halls of the local monastery, monks and nuns voluntarily embrace a life of austerity as a path to God. During periods of fasting, like the 40 days of Lent, their diet becomes incredibly restrictive. They, too, will eat gruel, but their experience is fundamentally different from yours. For a monk, eating bland, unsatisfying gruel is a spiritual discipline. It is an act of taming the flesh, of denying worldly pleasures to focus the mind on prayer and contemplation. It is a choice. For you, it is the absence of choice. The monk's empty stomach brings him closer to God. Your empty stomach brings you closer to the grave. It is a stark reminder that the meaning of an experience is defined entirely by its context. The difference between your everyday pottage and this meal of desperation can be subtle, a matter of degrees. A pottage that gets thinner and thinner each day slowly crosses an invisible line into gruel territory. Historians still debate the precise nutritional line between thin pottage and gruel in medieval records, as the terms were often used interchangeably, making it difficult to assess the true severity of food shortages based on textual evidence alone. A chronicler might write that the peasants were reduced to eating gruel. But was this the truly thin water and flour mixture, or just a very poor quality pottage? This academic puzzle highlights the difficulty of truly understanding the daily, granular reality of your life from the distance of centuries. But you don't need a historian to tell you the difference. You feel it in your bones. You feel it in the lack of energy in your limbs as you try to guide the plow, the way your head feels light and dizzy. You see it in the sunken cheeks of your family. This is the reality of subsistence living. But it could get worse. Much, much worse. Your personal hungry gap is a small-scale reflection of a terror that could grip the entire continent. You may have heard whispered tales from your grandfather, or stories passed down in the village, of the Great Hunger, a time when God seemed to have abandoned the world. This is not a myth. It is a historical reality. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was a cataclysmic event that reset the course of European history. It began with rain. In the spring of 1315, it started to rain, and it didn't stop All through the summer and into the autumn, the skies remained open. Fields turned to mud, seeds rotted before they could sprout, and the harvests failed on an unimaginable scale. The next year, 1316, was no better. The relentless wet weather continued. Grain stores were completely exhausted. The price of what little food was available skyrocketed beyond the reach of anyone but the richest nobles. This was when a thin gruel would have seemed like a feast. People were forced to eat the seed grain they had saved for planting, condemning the next year's harvest before it even began. They ate their draft animals, then their pets. The stories from this time are the stuff of nightmares. Chroniclers wrote of people eating dogs, cats, rats, and unclean things. There were widespread reports of cannibalism, of desperate people digging up the recently buried for food, of parents abandoning children they could no longer feed. Disease ran rampant through the weakened, starving population. It was an apocalyptic landscape. In this context, your bowl of watery oat gruel seems almost a blessing. It is a sign that you still have a roof over your head, a fire in your hearth, and a few handfuls of grain in your chest. You are on the edge, but you have not fallen into the abyss. The memory of these great famines, even generations later, haunts the collective consciousness of your village. It is the ultimate horror story, the cautionary tale that gives your current hardship a grim perspective. It reinforces the desperate need to be frugal, to waste nothing, to pray for a good harvest. Because you know how thin the line is between hunger and utter annihilation. As you finish your bowl of gruel, you scrape the last slick residue from the sides. There is no satisfaction, only a temporary truce with the emptiness in your stomach. You look towards the door of your hut, towards the gray light of dawn. The day's work still needs to be done, whether your belly is full of thick bread or watery gruel. You must find the strength somewhere. You must push through the weakness, the dizziness, the gnawing hunger. You must work so that, hopefully, tomorrow the pot might be a little thicker. Perhaps you will find some edible roots while clearing the Lord's field. Perhaps you can trade a bit of mending work for a handful of peas. Your mind becomes a desperate calculator of calories and opportunities. Life on a diet of gruel is life reduced to its most basic, animalistic function, the search for energy. The higher pleasures of flavor, texture, and communal feasting are forgotten luxuries. There is only the pot, the water, and the prayer for more flour. It is a profoundly humbling experience, stripping away everything but the raw, tenacious will to survive another day. It is the quiet, desperate foundation upon which the entire precarious edifice of your world is built. That gnawing, hollow feeling left by a diet of thin gruel creates a desperate focus in your mind. Every patch of dirt, every weed, every living thing is assessed for its potential caloric value. As you trudge through your daily labors, weak and perpetually hungry, your eyes scan the landscape not for beauty, but for opportunity. You are searching for anything that can thicken the pot, anything that can stand between your family and the slow fate of starvation. And in this desperate search, you find your savior. It is not glamorous. It is not celebrated in the songs of troubadours or depicted on the Lord's tapestries. It is squat, humble, and grows with its head buried in the dirt. It is the turnip. This simple root is your lifeline through the long, dark, and hungry months of winter. While the grain in your chest may dwindle, a successful turnip crop provides a bulwark of solid, reliable food. It thrives in the cool, damp weather that can sometimes plague your grain harvest. It is not fussy. growing reasonably well in the same tired patch of garden soil year after year. It represents resilience, practicality, and the stubborn refusal to give in to despair. The turnip is the undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of vegetables you don't want to eat every single day for 6 months. Your descendants will invent fancy cooking shows and entire grocery store aisles specifically to avoid this fate. But for you, its monotony is the price of survival. Your relationship with the turnip begins in the summer, after the spring crops are established. In your small family garden plot, the toft, you sow the tiny, black seeds into the prepared earth. You pray for enough rain to help them germinate, but not so much that they rot. You watch as the first green leaves sprout, and you diligently weed around them, protecting your future food supply from being choked out by hardier, less edible plants. The real work comes in the autumn, as the air grows crisp and the days shorten. The harvest of the turnips is a critical race against time. You must pull them from the ground before the first truly hard frost, which can split the roots and turn them to mush. You work on your hands and knees, the damp soil cold against your fingers. You dig around the base of the plant, loosen the earth, and pull. The feeling of a large, heavy turnip coming free from the soil is one of profound satisfaction. You knock the excess dirt from its pale, purple-shouldered globe and toss it onto a growing pile. Each one is a small victory, a tangible unit of food that will see you through the winter. What makes the turnip a true hero of your peasant diet is its sheer utility. Not a single part of the plant is wasted. You eat the root, you eat the leaves, you eat the flowers. If you could figure out a way to eat the dirt it grew in, you probably would. Waste not, starve not. The main prize is, of course, the root itself. When it's freshly pulled, you might wipe it clean and take a bite right there in the garden. It's crisp, watery, and has a sharp, peppery bite that feels invigorating. But this is a rare treat. The vast majority are destined for the pottage pot, where they will be boiled for hours until they are soft and have surrendered most of their flavor to the broth. They become a starchy, fibrous bulk, a filler that gives the winter pottage a substance it would otherwise lack. Before you store the roots, you twist off their leafy tops. These turnip greens are a crucial food source in themselves. In the autumn, you'll cook the fresh greens down, just as you would cabbage or nettles. They have a slightly bitter, mustardy flavor and provide vitamins that are increasingly scarce as the year wanes. Even the leaves of the turnips you leave in the ground to overwinter will be a welcome sight in the early spring, providing some of the first fresh greens after months of eating nothing but stored and preserved foods. Now comes the most important task: preservation. You have no cool, dry basement or modern root cellar. Your method of storage is an ancient technique, a simple but effective piece of agricultural engineering. You create a turnip clamp. You find a well-drained spot of ground and dig a shallow pit, perhaps a foot or so deep. You line this pit with a thick layer of dry straw or bracken to provide insulation and absorb moisture. Then, you carefully build a pyramid with your best turnips, the ones that are firm and unblemished. You pile them high, creating a mound of winter promise. Once the pile is complete, you cover it with another thick layer of straw, and then you heap the excavated earth back over the entire mound, packing it down to create a small, man-made hill. You might leave a small tuft of straw sticking out of the top to act as a chimney, allowing excess moisture and heat to escape and preventing the turnips from rotting. This clamp is now your winter pantry. It protects the turnips from the freezing cold, from the gnawing teeth of rats and mice, and from the rot that moisture can bring. Throughout the dead of winter, when the world outside is frozen and barren, you will come to this spot. You will use a tool to break through the frozen crust of earth on one side of the clamp, creating a small opening into the straw-lined interior. You reach into the cold, dark, earthy-smelling space and pull out a few turnips, just enough to last your family for a few days. Then you carefully seal the hole again, protecting the rest of your hoard. This simple act of retrieving food from the clamp is a ritual of survival, a testament to your foresight and labor months earlier. For months, the turnip is the dominant flavor in your life. Every evening, your pottage is thick with its soft, watery chunks. Sometimes, for a change, you might spear a whole turnip on a stick and roast it in the hot embers of the fire until its skin is blackened and its flesh is soft and sweet. But mostly, it's boiled. The sheer, unrelenting monotony of the flavor is a challenge. It's the taste of January, the taste of February, the taste of survival. While you are eating turnips simply to stay alive, this humble root is destined for greater fame, though not for a few more centuries. Your use of it is the foundation for what will later become a key element of the British agricultural revolution. In the 17th and 18th centuries, visionaries like Charles Turnip Townshend would pioneer the use of turnips as a fodder crop grown as part of a new four-field rotation system. Planting turnips allowed farmers to keep more livestock alive through the winter, which in turn produced more manure to fertilize the fields, leading to higher grain yields. It was a virtuous cycle that transformed agriculture. But all that history begins here, with you, in your muddy garden, recognizing the simple, life-sustaining power of this unassuming root, not for your animals, but for your own family. Life in the dead of winter is dark and frightening. The nights are long, and the fire is the only shield against the cold and the shadows. In this world, belief in the supernatural is not a fantasy. It's a daily reality. And even your humble turnip has a role to play in this spiritual landscape. An interesting piece of folklore, a quirky tradition that survives in spirit to this day, is the carving of turnips into lanterns. Long before pumpkins became the symbol of Halloween, people in the British Isles carved grotesque faces into turnips and other root vegetables. You might take one of the larger turnips, hollow it out, a difficult task with its dense flesh, and carve a crude, frightening face into its side. Placing a small chunk of glowing coal or a tiny tallow candle inside, you would create a ghoulish lantern. Carving a face into a turnip is 10 times harder than a pumpkin, and the result is 100 times more terrifying. Your ghoulish turnip head looks less like a festive decoration and more like a shrunken head that's seen things no vegetable should ever see. You would hang this outside your door on nights like All Hallows Eve to scare away malevolent spirits. The eerie, flickering light from its eyes and mouth, a tiny beacon of defiance against the forces of darkness. As you rely on this staple, it's worth noting that the very identity of your turnip is a subject of quiet academic debate. Historians and botanists debate the exact nature of the medieval turnip, questioning whether it was more closely related to the modern white, purple-topped turnip you might picture, or to its hardier, oil-rich cousin, Brassica rapa, the ancestor of modern rapeseed and canola. The lines between different plant varieties were much blurrier in your time. You simply call it a turnip, and you know it by its function. It grows, it stores, and it keeps you from starving. The precise botanical classification is a luxury for a future time. When spring finally begins to break the grip of winter, your remaining turnips start to change. Spurred by the lengthening days and warmer soil, the overwintered roots begin their second stage of life. They bolt, sending up a tall stalk that produces clusters of small, four-petaled yellow flowers. For you, this is not a sign of failure, but another opportunity. You gather these flowers and their tender stems and add them to the pot. They have a mild, slightly peppery flavor, similar to broccoli rabe, and they are a welcome splash of color and fresh taste after a winter of bland whiteness. This is the final gift of the turnip, a plant that you have now used from root to leaf to flower. It has carried you through the darkest part of the year. It has filled the pot when it would have otherwise been empty. It is a symbol not of wealth or power, but of something far more important: endurance. The turnip has carried you through the winter, its stolid, bland flesh a bulwark against the season of scarcity. But as the days lengthen and the hard ground softens, your palate, weary from months of the same earthy monotony, yearns for something more. The first green shoots in your garden are a sign of deliverance, not just from hunger, but from boredom. And while many different plants will begin to grace your pottage pot, two stalwarts form the very soul of its flavor, the indispensable partners to the grain and the root. They are the pungent, tear-inducing onion and the sturdy, sulfurous cabbage. These are not delicate herbs used with a light hand. They are the loud, assertive, and utterly essential flavor makers of your world. After a winter of turnip-thickened pottage, the addition of cabbage is a dramatic event. You cultivate a hardy, loose-leafed variety, more akin to a modern kale or collard green than the tight, pale cannonball you might picture. It's a generous plant. You don't have to harvest the whole thing at once. You can pluck the tough outer leaves as needed, leaving the central plant to continue producing. You bring your harvest back to the hut, rinse the leaves, and chop them coarsely. They go into the pot, and as they cook, they release their distinctive aroma. The smell of boiling cabbage fills your small hut, a fragrance your descendants will try to gentrify by calling it braised brassica and charging $20 for it. You just call it Tuesday. For hours, the cabbage simmers in the pottage along with the grains and other ingredients. It breaks down, becoming soft, almost slimy, its fibers weaving themselves throughout the stew. It lends a strong, slightly sweet, and profoundly brassicaceous flavor to everything. It's a dominant taste, a sign that the leanest months are over and the garden is producing once more. The cabbage is a workhorse, easy to grow and reliable. It can be made into a simple soup on its own, or fermented with salt to create a sour, preserved dish, a forerunner to sauerkraut, that can last for months, providing a tangy, acidic counterpoint to the blandness of winter fare. But the true king of flavor, the absolute foundation of your culinary world, belongs to the allium family. Onions, leeks, and garlic are your spice rack, your flavor base, your everything. You can't imagine cooking without them. Chief among them is the onion. You grow them in neat rows, their green shoots poking hopefully from the dark soil. At harvest time, you pull them up, let them dry in the sun, and then braid their dried tops together to form long, beautiful ropes. You hang these from the wooden rafters of your hut, a visible and fragrant display of your stored wealth. They are protected from damp and pests, and they will last you through the winter, a precious resource to be used one at a time. Each day, you might take down one of these small, pungent globes. As you slice into it, the sharp, volatile compounds hit the air, making your eyes water. A familiar, almost comforting sting. The onion goes into the pot, and as it cooks down over hours, its initial sharpness mellows into a deep, savory sweetness that enriches the entire stew. It provides a foundational flavor, a je ne sais quoi that elevates the pottage from a simple porridge of grains and vegetables into something that tastes purposefully constructed. A small, finely chopped raw onion, mixed with a little salt and eaten with a hunk of your dark bread, is a powerful, simple pleasure, a burst of flavor that cuts through the fatigue of a long day's labor. A close cousin to the onion is the leek. Leeks are even hardier, a true winter vegetable. You can leave them in the ground, their white shanks buried in the earth, and pull them as needed even when there's a frost on the ground. They are milder than onions, with a gentler, greener sweetness. They are wonderful when roasted slowly in the embers of the hearth until they are soft and caramelized, a simple delicacy that feels almost luxurious. More often, though, they join their onion cousins in the pottage, adding another layer to its savory depth. And then there is garlic. Garlic is power. It's more potent, more intense than its relatives. You likely grow less of it. It's a more valuable commodity. A single clove, crushed and thrown into the pot, can transform the meal, adding a warm, pungent kick. Historians debate the true peasant access to potent spices like garlic. While easy to grow, some records suggest it was more of a valuable cash crop to be sold at market, with peasants more commonly relying on the milder wild garlic, or ramps, foraged from the woodlands in spring. But whether it's cultivated or wild, that garlic flavor is treasured. Beyond its taste, garlic is considered powerful medicine. This belief is rooted in the dominant medical philosophy of your time, humoral theory. This system, inherited from the ancient Greeks and Romans, posits that the body is composed of 4 essential fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is achieved when these humors are in perfect balance. Every food, every herb, every aspect of the environment is classified as having qualities of hot, cold, wet, or dry. Illness is seen as an imbalance of these qualities. Onions and garlic are classified as hot and dry. Therefore, eating them is believed to counteract cold and wet conditions, like a common cold or poor digestion. They are thought to stimulate the blood, thin the phlegm, and aid the body in expelling impurities. According to the wise men, your onion-heavy dinner is hot and dry, which is great for your humors. It's also great for ensuring no one wants to stand too close to you, which can be its own kind of benefit. This belief in the power of alliums extends beyond medicine and into the realm of folklore and finance. In a world with little circulating currency, the value of these plants is well understood. It's a quirky but revealing historical tidbit that some medieval rents and tithes were not paid in coin, but in kind. A peasant might owe his lord an annual rent of a few shillings, a chicken, and a rope of 100 onions, or a certain number of garlic cloves. This speaks to their essential value, not just as food, but as a stable, storable, and tradable commodity. Superstition also clings to them. A peeled onion placed under the bed of a sick person was thought to draw the illness out of their body, absorbing the malady into its own layers. And, of course, garlic's reputation for warding off evil, from malevolent spirits to the dreaded vampire of later folklore, has its roots in this period, where its pungent, life-affirming power was seen as a natural enemy to the forces of darkness and decay. Now, we must address the unavoidable side effect of a diet so rich in these particular vegetables. Your meals are heavy in cabbage, onions, leeks, and, as we will soon see, dried legumes. All of these foods are rich in complex sugars that the human body cannot fully digest. As these compounds travel through your digestive system, the bacteria in your gut have an absolute field day, producing copious amounts of gas as a byproduct. Flatulence is a simple, inescapable fact of your life. Your one-room hut, where the entire family cooks, eats, and sleeps, provides a very intimate setting for these well-known digestive consequences. Let's just say that personal space is as much a fantasy as a hot bath or a day off. After an evening meal of thick pottage, the air in the small, enclosed space becomes thick with more than just wood smoke. This isn't a source of modern-style embarrassment or comedy. It is so universal, so constant, that it's simply part of the background sensory experience, like the smell of the fire or the feel of the straw mattress. It is the audible and aromatic evidence that you have eaten, that your body is processing the fuel it needs to survive. There is a certain earthy lack of pretense to it all. Social discomfort is a luxury you cannot afford when the alternative is an empty stomach. The wind-making properties of your food are a small price to pay for the flavor and nourishment they provide. So you embrace these powerful vegetables. You learn their seasons and their needs. You tend to them in your garden with care, knowing that they are the difference between a bowl of plain, boiled grain and a genuinely savory meal. They are your defense against the blandness of poverty. The sharp bite of an onion, the bitter tang of a cabbage leaf, the warm hum of garlic. These are the flavors that punctuate your days. They are the flavors of home. They are the proof that even in a life of hardship, there is room for small, pungent pleasures. They may not be subtle, but they are strong and they are constant, just like the people who rely on them. The flavorful power of your onions and cabbages, while a blessing to your palate, comes with that well-known digestive cost. The predictable wind-making properties of your diet are only amplified by the next essential component of your pottage, another humble hero of your garden plot. This is the food that gives you strength, the food that builds your muscle, the food that stands in for the roasted meats on the Lord's table. You rely on the dense, sustaining power of dried peas and beans. These legumes are your protein, the quiet, unassuming engine of your physical world. When the Lord of the Manor talks about his protein, he means a roasted swan, a haunch of venison, or a fat capon. When you talk about your protein, you mean the mushy, earthy legumes at the bottom of your simmering pot. The end result is survival, but the journey is different. For you, meat is a rare and precious luxury, a treat for a feast day like Christmas or Easter, if you're lucky. For the day-to-day, for the raw strength needed to push a plow or swing a scythe, you depend on the power of the pea. This reliance is not just a matter of economics. It's a matter of religious law. Your life is governed by the rhythms of the church calendar, and this has a profound impact on what you can and cannot eat. This is a central, mainstream fact of your existence. The church dictates numerous fasting days throughout the year. You must abstain from eating meat every Friday in solemn remembrance of the crucifixion. You must also fast during the entire 40-day period of Lent leading up to Easter, and often during Advent, the season before Christmas. Add to this a host of vigils and saints' days, and you can spend nearly half the year forbidden from eating the flesh of land animals. Dairy and eggs are often off limits during these times as well. These rules are not suggestions. They are sacred obligations, and breaking them is a sin. This religious framework fundamentally shapes the entire food economy of medieval Europe, making fish and plant-based proteins not just an option, but an absolute necessity. And so, you turn to peas and beans. Chief among them is the field pea, or peas. You grow them in your strip of the village's spring field as part of the 3-field rotation. After the harvest, you spread the peas out to dry in the sun until they are hard little pellets, stored in a cloth sack in a dry corner of your hut. They will last for years, a durable currency of nutrition. Their value extends beyond your own stomach. Legumes are agricultural superheroes. They perform a kind of magic in the soil, a magic you understand through observation rather than science. You know that if you plant peas or beans in a field one year, the wheat or rye you plant in that same field the next year will grow stronger and taller. You are witnessing the power of nitrogen fixation. The nodules on the roots of these plants draw nitrogen from the air and convert it into a natural fertilizer in the soil. Agricultural historians debate the speed and extent to which this nitrogen-fixing property was consciously understood by the average medieval peasant. Was it simply empirical knowledge passed down through generations? A folk wisdom that said, the grain grows better after the peas? Or was it a more systematic understanding of crop rotation actively promoted by the educated managers of large monastic estates and the Lord's own reeve? For you, the theory doesn't matter. The results do. Planting legumes keeps your land from becoming exhausted. It means a better grain harvest next year. They feed you, and they feed the soil that feeds you. The most common way you consume your dried peas is in the pottage. They are rock hard when dry, so they must be soaked in water for hours, or even overnight, to soften them. Then they are tossed into the great cauldron to simmer for an entire day. Over the long, slow cooking, they break down completely, dissolving into a thick, creamy, and satisfying mush that gives the pottage body and a hearty, earthy flavor. They are the invisible foundation of the stew's texture, the source of its satisfying thickness. Sometimes, however, the peas are the star of the show. You might make a peas pottage, a dish so fundamental to your world that it will be immortalized in a nursery rhyme centuries later. Your great-great-grandchildren will turn your staple meal into a catchy song, which is a bit like making a jingle about leftover oatmeal. They just don't understand the desperation of eating it cold because the fire went out. To make it, you would boil the dried peas with onions and perhaps some herbs from your garden until they form a thick, savory porridge. Eaten hot, it's a deeply comforting and filling meal. If you let it cool, it solidifies into a firm loaf that can be sliced and eaten cold or fried in a little lard, if you have any. It is versatile, cheap, and packed with the energy you need. Alongside peas, you also grow broad beans, sometimes known as fava beans. These are ancient staples, cultivated for millennia. They are large, leathery, and robust. Like peas, they are dried for storage and require long soaking and cooking. They have a stronger, more distinctly nutty flavor and don't break down quite as completely as peas do. leaving tender, whole beans in your pottage. They are another pillar of your Lenten diet, another way to fill the void left by the absence of meat. It is strange to think that these life-sustaining beans were once viewed with extreme suspicion. In a quirky and fascinating tidbit from the ancient world, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras and his secretive brotherhood of followers famously refused to eat beans. The reasons are lost to history and debated to this day. Some scholars think it was because they believed beans contained the transmigrated souls of the dead. Others suggest a more medical reason, speculating that Pythagoras may have known about fauvism, a dangerous genetic condition prevalent in the Mediterranean that causes a severe anemic reaction to fava beans. Still others suggest the reason was more philosophical. The gas-inducing properties of beans were thought to disturb the tranquil state of mind necessary for deep contemplation. Imagine trying to explain to one of these ancient philosophers that this spiritually suspect food is what keeps you alive for half the year. An ancient Greek philosopher apparently thought beans were full of dead people's souls. You're pretty sure they're just full of dinner, but you can see how after a large meal in your small hut, the air might feel thick with spirits of a different kind. For you, these theological or philosophical concerns are an unimaginable luxury. A bean is not a metaphysical puzzle. It is a promise of a full belly. It is the food that allows you to obey God's laws without starving. When the priest reminds you on Friday morning that no meat shall pass your lips, you feel no panic, only a quiet resignation. You know that the pot simmering on your hearth is already compliant. Its thickness and flavor derive not from forbidden bacon, but from humble, honorable peas. They are the food of piety and the food of poverty, two states that are often closely intertwined in your world. They are the protein of the people, the fuel for the faithful, the quiet heroes of the medieval field and table. Your diet of peas and beans, dictated by both poverty and piety, is the baseline of your existence. It is the fuel of dutiful fasting and everyday survival. But there are moments, rare and glorious, when this routine is shattered by the arrival of meat. The occasion might be a great feast day, Christmas, perhaps, or the celebration after the harvest is brought in, when the lord of the manor, in a gesture of paternalistic generosity, provides a pig or an old ox for the village to share. Or perhaps it is a more personal event. The day has come to slaughter your own family's pig, an animal you have painstakingly fattened on household scraps all year. On this day, the entire rhythm of your life changes. The simmering pottage is no longer a meal of subsistence. It is about to become a vessel for a rich, savory, and deeply coveted feast. But you do not get the choice cuts. The concept of a pork chop or a tenderloin is as foreign to you as the silks worn by the lady of the manor. The social order is reflected on the butcher's block as clearly as it is in the courtroom. The lord, his family, and his honored guests will dine on the hams, the loins, the best roasting joints. This hierarchy is even enforced by law. Throughout the Middle Ages, various sumptuary laws were enacted across Europe, designed to control consumption and reinforce class distinctions. These laws might dictate the colors of cloth you are allowed to wear, or, in some cases, the types of food you were permitted to eat, explicitly reserving the finest game birds or the best cuts of meat for the nobility. Your place in the world is clear. You get the leftovers. These leftovers are the offal, the organs, the head, the feet, and all the other bits and pieces discarded by the wealthy. For you, these are not scraps. They are a treasure trove of fat, protein, and flavor. You practice nose to tail, eating, not because it's a trendy, sustainable philosophy, but because you cannot afford to waste a single bristle. It's the original zero-waste lifestyle, born from zero choice. The day of the slaughter is a day of intense, coordinated labor. The air hangs thick with anticipation and the metallic scent of blood. The processing must happen immediately, without refrigeration. Spoilage is the enemy, a thief that can steal this precious windfall in a matter of hours. The freshly slaughtered animal is a mountain of potential, and every part must be assigned a purpose. The head is a prize. It may look gruesome, but you see it for what it is, a source of rich meat and broth. It will be submerged in the great cauldron and boiled for hours. The long, slow cooking softens the tough muscle and renders the fat. The meat from the cheeks, a surprisingly tender and flavorful morsel, is picked from the bone. The tongue, a dense and delicious muscle, is peeled and sliced. All this meat, chopped and mixed with the gelatin-rich broth from the boiled head, is poured into a dish or a cloth to cool and set. It becomes a wobbly, savory jelly known as head cheese or brawn, a delicacy that will last for several days and provide rich, fatty slices to be eaten with your bread. Then there are the internal organs, known collectively as the pluck, because they are plucked from the carcass in one go. The heart and the liver must be dealt with first. The heart, a dense, powerful muscle, might be sliced and roasted over the coals, a rare treat eaten almost immediately. The liver, rich with iron, could be chopped and fried with an onion, its powerful flavor a welcome shock to the system. More often, both are chopped and thrown into the pot, adding an unparalleled richness and a dark, savory depth to the pottage that night. The other organs require more work. The lungs, spongy and strange, are boiled, minced, and mixed with oatmeal, suet, fat from around the kidneys, onions, and whatever spices you might have, perhaps some pepper or wild herbs. This mixture is then stuffed into the pig's stomach, which has been meticulously scraped and cleaned, a truly laborious and unpleasant task. The stuffed stomach is then boiled for hours, creating a dish very similar to Scottish haggis. It is a dense, savory, and incredibly nutritious pudding that utilizes the parts no one else wants. The intestines, after an equally thorough and unpleasant cleaning, can also be used as casings for sausage, or chopped and stewed to make tripe. Even the blood is not wasted. In fact, it is one of the most valuable parts. As the animal is bled, the blood is collected in a bucket and stirred constantly to keep it from coagulating. This liquid nutrition is then mixed with barley, breadcrumbs, or oats, along with precious bits of fat and seasoning. The mixture is piped into cleaned lengths of intestine to create blood sausage, or what you might know as black pudding. These sausages are then boiled until firm. They are incredibly rich in iron and fat, a superfood of the medieval world. They are a way of preserving the most perishable part of the animal and creating a food that will provide energy for weeks to come. The feet, or trotters, seem to offer little meat, but their value lies in their connective tissues. Boiled for hours upon hours, the trotters dissolve their collagen and cartilage into the water, creating a broth so thick with gelatin that it will set into a firm jelly when it cools. This gelatinous broth is a powerful addition to the pottage, adding body, richness, and nutrients that are believed to be good for the joints, a welcome medicine for a body racked by physical labor. This is the frantic, bloody, and ultimately rewarding work of the slaughter day. Every member of the family has a role, from stirring the blood to scraping the intestines to chopping the meat. By nightfall, the hut is filled with the smells of cooking fat, boiling meat, and savory spices for dinner that night. You will have a feast. The pottage is dark and thick, studded with chunks of heart and liver. You eat with a fervor you'd forgotten. The rich, meaty flavor, a stark contrast to the familiar taste of peas and turnips. It is a meal that replenishes not just your body, but your spirit. It's on a day like this that you might truly understand the meaning of humble pie. This quirky phrase has its roots in the very system of meat distribution you live by. When a lord and his party went hunting for deer, the finest cuts of venison were reserved for the high table. The huntsmen, servants, and other lower-ranking members of the household were given the leftover parts of the deer, the heart, liver, and entrails, collectively known as the numbles or umbles. These would be baked into a savory pie. So, to eat humble pie was to literally eat the humble parts, a direct and edible reminder of your social standing. Tonight, as you eat your stew fortified with pig's liver, you might reflect that you are, in essence, eating your own version of humble pie. It tastes like irony, both the mineral and the literary kind. Your descendants will pay a fortune in fancy restaurants for pâté and charcuterie, having no idea it's just your Tuesday night, whatever was left of the pig meal, but with a French name and a bigger price tag. While the story of your diet is often one of near vegetarianism, punctuated by these rare feasts of offal, the reality may have been slightly more varied. Historians and archaeologists debate the true proportion of meat in the medieval peasant diet. While written sources, often penned by monks or nobles, tend to emphasize the meatless toil of the peasantry, archaeological evidence from refuse pits in medieval villages sometimes tells a different story. The analysis of discarded animal bones suggests that access to meat, particularly pork from peasant-raised pigs and mutton from old sheep, might have been more regular than the bleakest accounts suggest, though still seasonal and far from frequent. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between the two extremes. Your diet is not entirely without meat, but it is certainly a world away from the daily carnivorous habits of the aristocracy. For now, you do not worry about historical debates. You savor the moment. The feast will last for a few days. The brawn will be sliced, the black pudding eaten, the last of the organ meat consumed. Soon, the memory of the rich, fatty flavor will begin to fade, and your pottage will return to its familiar vegetable and legume-based reality. But the slaughter has provided more than just a few meals. The rendered fat, or lard, has been stored in a pot and will be used sparingly for weeks to come, adding flavor and calories to your cooking. The experience itself, the brief but glorious abundance, is a reminder of what you are working for. It is a high point in the long, monotonous landscape of your culinary year. A feast of scraps that makes you feel, for a fleeting moment, truly rich. The rich, fatty memory of the awful feast fades all too quickly. The last of the brawn has been eaten, the final blood sausage consumed. Your pottage has returned to its humble, vegetable-based state. And now, the church bell tolls on a Friday morning, a familiar reminder of your sacred duty. Today is a fast day, No meat from a land animal may pass your lips. The savory memory of pork is now a minor torment, a temptation to be pushed aside. But your body, accustomed to the recent protein boost, still craves that substantial, muscle-building nourishment, especially with a long day of labor ahead. So, what is the answer? How do you fuel your body while saving your soul? You turn to the other great protein source of your world, the pungent, oily, and intensely salty gift of the sea, the herring. You do not live by the coast. The crash of ocean waves is a sound you have never heard. Your world is one of fields and forests, of mud and streams. A fresh fish is a rare luxury, something the Lord might have pulled from his private, well-stocked fish pond, or a lucky catch from the local river. But the sea finds its way to you. It arrives in a barrel, carried overland on a creaking cart driven by a traveling merchant. It arrives in the form of salted herring, the fast food of the Middle Ages. When the merchant sets up his stall in the village, the smell announces his arrival long before you see him. It's an overpowering aroma, an intense fusion of brine and fish oil that cuts through the usual village scents of wood smoke and livestock. You approach the barrels, and the merchant uses a tool to pry one open. Inside, you see them, ranks of silvery fish, lying stiff and still, entombed in a thick crust of coarse, gray salt. This is not the delicate, flaky fish of a nobleman's platter. This is industrial-scale protein, a commodity designed for transport and longevity. The first bite of a salted herring is less a flavor and more a physical event. You might buy just a few fish, a small but significant expense. The most common way to eat it is the simplest. You take one, knock off the excess crystals of salt against a stone, and you chew. The flesh is tough, oily, and unleashes a wave of salt so intense it makes your eyes water and your entire face want to turn inside out for a moment. But beneath the salt is the rich, unmistakable taste of the sea, a flavor wholly different from anything that grows in your fields. It is a powerful, shocking, and deeply savory experience. It's the original protein bar. No cooking required, lasts forever in your tunic pocket, and has a smell so strong it guarantees no one will try to steal it from you. This culinary marvel is made possible by two things: the astonishing abundance of the fish itself and the transformative power of salt. Herrings swim in enormous shoals in the cold waters of the North Sea and the Baltic. Fishermen can catch them by the ton, but a fresh herring spoils in a day. The key was developing a method of preservation that was cheap and effective. The solution, perfected over centuries, was barrel salting, a specific technique, sometimes called gibbing, was a crucial innovation, with its development often attributed by legend to a 14th century Dutch fisherman named Willem Beukelsen. This method involved removing the gills and gut but leaving the pancreas intact. The enzymes from the pancreas helped to cure the fish from the inside out as it sat in the brine, resulting in a superior, longer-lasting product. Whether one man truly invented it or not, this quirky tidbit of food processing history had massive economic consequences, helping the Dutch and others turn herring into gold. The fish were layered in barrels with huge quantities of salt, which drew out the water and created an environment hostile to the bacteria that caused spoilage. A properly salted barrel of herring could last for a year or more, allowing this bounty of the sea to be traded far and wide. And this is where your humble, salty lunch connects you to the great geopolitical forces of your age. The herring trade was a cornerstone of the immense wealth and power of the Hanseatic League. This was a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns, primarily in northern Germany, that dominated trade across northern Europe from the 13th to the 17th centuries. They were a medieval superpower, with their own diets, armies, and a vast network of trading posts, from London to Bruges to Novgorod in Russia. They controlled the sources of salt, the fishing grounds, and the trade routes. The barrel of herring that arrives in your landlocked village is the very last stop on a supply chain that crosses seas and nations, a testament to the Hanseatic League's commercial empire. Your dinner is a direct consequence of international trade agreements and maritime logistics. If you have the time and the inclination for a slightly more refined meal, you can attempt to tame the herring's aggressive saltiness. You might place the fish in a bucket of fresh water, or even whey from cheese making if you have it, for several hours. This soaking process, or desalting, draws out a significant amount of the salt, making the fish more palatable. The water must be changed several times. After soaking, the flesh is softer and the flavor more nuanced, though still intensely fishy. You might then grill the softened fish over the embers of your fire, the heat crisping the skin and filling the hut with its pungent smoke. Or you could flake the meat from the bones and stir it into your Lenten pottage, where it dissolves and lends its savory, umami flavor to the entire pot, creating a simple, permissible fish stew. This pungent, preserved fish is so much a part of the culture that it has even worked its way into your language, or at least it will for your descendants. One theory for the origin of the phrase red herring comes from a similar type of preserved fish, a kipper that was salted and heavily smoked until it turned a reddish color and developed an incredibly strong smell. This potent fish was supposedly used to train hunting dogs by dragging it across a field to teach a young hound to follow a scent, or by dragging it across the trail of a fox to try and distract the dogs as a test of their focus. To drag a red herring across a conversation thus becomes a metaphor for introducing an irrelevant, distracting piece of information. You hear stories of nobles training their dogs with these smelly fish. You'd happily train your own dog with one if you had a dog and could afford to give it a perfectly good, if overpoweringly pungent, fish. While preserved sea fish is your most common aquatic protein, it might not be your only one. Historians debate the true freshwater versus saltwater fish consumption of inland peasants. The trade in salted herring and cod was undeniably massive and ubiquitous. However, archaeological digs near medieval villages often unearth the bones of freshwater fish. The remains of small fish like roach, bream, dace, and especially eel are common finds in refuse pits. This suggests that you and your neighbors might have supplemented your diet by fishing in the local rivers, streams, and ponds. This was often a legally gray area. The best fishing rights usually belonged to the lord of the manor, and being caught poaching fish from his private pond could result in severe punishment. But a cleverly placed wicker trap in a small stream, or a line dropped into the river at night, might yield a small but welcome catch, providing a fresh alternative to the endless saltiness of the herring. The eel, in particular, was a prized catch, fatty, rich, and boneless. It could be roasted, stewed, or jellied. But these freshwater treats are opportunistic and unreliable. The herring is the constant. It is the dependable, affordable, and religiously sanctioned protein that fuels your labor on the many meatless days of the year. It is a food of remarkable contrasts. It is a local fish from a distant sea. It is a simple meal that is the product of a complex international trade network. Its taste is harsh and overwhelming, yet it is a welcome and necessary part of your diet. It is the taste of obedience to God and the taste of economic reality. As you chew on the tough, salty flesh, you are partaking in a ritual shared by millions, from the fishermen on the stormy Baltic coast to the farmers in the heart of France. You are eating the fish that built cities, funded armies, and kept the peasantry of Europe alive. After a meal featuring the aggressive saltiness of a preserved herring, a powerful thirst takes hold. You reach for your mug, a rough cup made of fired clay or carved from wood, and fill it. But you do not fill it from the water bucket that sits by the door. To drink from that bucket directly is a gamble you are not willing to take. In your world, water is a source of constant suspicion. It is often the bearer of invisible death. Instead, you quench your thirst with the cloudy, brownish liquid that is the true staple beverage of your life. Weak ale. The water in your village comes from the local stream or a communal well. This same stream is where animals drink and relieve themselves. It's where your neighbors might wash their dirty laundry or dump their household waste. The well, while perhaps cleaner, is still vulnerable to contamination from the groundwater, which is saturated with the runoff from the village's privies and animal pens. There is no concept of sanitation, no understanding of germ theory. You only know through brutal experience that drinking the water, especially in the warm summer months, can lead to a terrible sickness in the gut, dysentery, typhoid, cholera, that can weaken and kill both the young and the old. The water may look clear, but it carries unseen dangers. So, you drink ale. And it's not just you. Everyone drinks ale. Your wife drinks it. You drink it in the fields. And, in a detail that might shock a modern sensibility, your children drink it too. Your 5-year-old is having a mug of ale with his breakfast. Before you call medieval social services, you must understand what this ale actually is. It is not a potent, intoxicating brew designed for recreation. It is small ale or small beer, a beverage with a very low alcohol content, probably between 1 and 3%. It is considered less a drink and more a form of liquid food, and most importantly, it is safe. The magic of ale lies in its creation. Brewing is a domestic chore, like baking or mending, and it is almost exclusively the domain of women. The alewife, or brewster, is a central figure in the village economy and social life. The process begins with grain, usually barley, the same crop that makes your bread and thickens your pottage. The grain is first malted, a process of allowing it to sprout and then heating it to stop the germination. This develops the enzymes needed to convert the grain starches into fermentable sugars. The alewife then takes this malt, crushes it, and mixes it with hot water in a large vessel. This process, called mashing, creates a sweet, sugary liquid known as wort. The next step is the crucial one for safety. The wort is boiled, often for an hour or more. This prolonged, rolling boil kills the vast majority of the bacteria and pathogens that might have been lurking in the water. This is the simple, transformative act that turns dangerous water into a safe drink. Before hops became common in brewing later in the Middle Ages, The flavor of the ale would be balanced by a proprietary blend of herbs and spices known as Gruel. This is a fascinating and quirky aspect of brewing history. The recipe for Gruel was often a closely guarded secret, and the right to sell it was a monopoly granted by the local lord or the church. It might contain herbs like bog myrtle for bitterness, yarrow for its preservative qualities, or wild rosemary for aroma. The mysterious character of Gruel gave each region's ale a unique flavor, and the taxes on it generated significant income for the authorities. The later, centuries-long shift from Gruel to hops as the primary beer flavoring was less about taste and more about politics and economics, a kind of beer war that broke the old monopolies. After boiling, the wort is cooled and yeast is added. The yeast is a living culture, the barm, skimmed from the top of a previous fermentation, a yeasty heirloom passed from one batch to the next. The yeast goes to work, consuming the sugars in the wort and producing alcohol and carbon dioxide. After a few days of bubbling fermentation, the result is ale. You pour it from a jug into your mug. It is not bright and clear like a modern lager. It is cloudy and opaque, full of suspended yeast and proteins. It has little to no fizzy head. The color is a murky brown or amber. The smell is yeasty and bready, with a hint of sweetness from the malt. The taste is what you'd expect from its nickname, liquid bread. It's thin, a little watery, with the wholesome flavor of grain. It's not bitter or strong. Don't imagine a crisp, refreshing lager. Imagine you left a piece of bread in a puddle, then filtered it through a sock. But it's a safe sock puddle, and that's what matters. This weak ale is more than just safe hydration. It is a vital source of calories. A life of hard agricultural labor requires a massive energy intake, and the ale provides a constant, easily digestible stream of calories throughout the day, supplementing the solids of your pottage and bread. It's your equivalent of a sports drink, replenishing fluids and energy simultaneously. This caloric content is the main reason it's given to children. In a world of frequent food scarcity, no source of nutrition is overlooked. While most brewing is done for the family, a skilled alewife can turn her craft into a crucial source of income. When she has a particularly good batch ready for sale, she will advertise it by placing an ale stake, which could be a simple long pole, a broom, or a bush, over her door. This is the medieval equivalent of flipping the open sign. It's a beacon of hope that lets the villagers know that fresh, safe ale is available. Her home becomes a makeshift tavern or ale house, a center for village social life where news is exchanged and neighbors can relax after a day's work. The role of women as the primary brewers and sellers of ale is a mainstream historical fact of this era. It was one of the few avenues through which a woman could be a respected and independent entrepreneur in her community. This began to change in the later Middle Ages as brewing became a larger scale, more commercial enterprise, with male-dominated guilds gradually pushing the small-scale alewives out of the market. Of course, the safety of ale was not an absolute guarantee. Historians debate the universal efficacy of the process. While boiling the wort was a massive step towards sanitation, a bad batch of ale was still a real possibility. If the brewing vessels themselves were contaminated, if the yeast culture was tainted, or if the water used was particularly foul to begin with, the resulting ale could still cause sickness. It was far safer than water, but it wasn't a perfect silver bullet against all waterborne illness. You know this from experience. You've had ale that tasted sour or off, a sign that the fermentation had gone wrong. But on most days, the ale is good. It is the constant companion to your meals, the thing that washes down the coarse bread and the salty herring. It is the safe and welcome drink you give to a thirsty child. It is the social lubricant that oils the gears of village life. It is a testament to the ingenuity of your ancestors, who learned to transform a dangerous necessity into a safe and nourishing staple. It is the simple, humble, and life-sustaining taste of home. The weak, bready ale you drink is not for pleasure. It is for hydration, for calories, and for safety. And in this simple fact lies the secret to your entire world of food. Every single thing you have consumed on our journey together, from the endless pottage to the rock-hard bread, from the life-saving turnip to the rare, bloody feast of offal, has been governed by a brutal and unforgiving philosophy. You do not dine, you survive. Every bite is a calculation of energy, a hedge against starvation, a practical negotiation with the harsh realities of your existence. Your culinary philosophy is simple. If it doesn't try to eat you first, and it doesn't kill you, it's dinner. There are no celebrity chefs in your village, only celebrity survivors. This philosophy is built on a few core principles. The first and most important is the supremacy of calories over taste. Your life is one of relentless physical labor. From sunrise to sunset, you are burning energy, and that energy must be replaced. The bland, starchy thickness of the pottage, the sheer density of your rye and barley bread, these are not culinary flaws. They are the entire point. Flavor is a happy accident, a fleeting bonus from a sharp onion or a foraged herb. The primary goal is fuel. You chew through another monotonous meal not in search of delight, but in search of the strength to get up and do the same hard work again tomorrow. The second principle is that the local is the only option. Your diet is a direct reflection of the 5-mile radius you inhabit. You eat what your small garden plot produces, what your allotted strips in the communal field yield, and what you can forage from the nearby woods and hedgerows. Your diet is technically seasonal, but not in the modern, celebratory sense. You have the turnip season, followed by the slightly more turnip season, and the glorious not turnip for a little while season. The arrival of spring nettles isn't a charming menu update. It's a desperate infusion of green after a winter of white roots. There are no exotic spices from the east, no sugar from faraway plantations. Your connection to the soil beneath your feet is absolute and inescapable. You are, quite literally, made of the dirt you farm. This leads to the final, all-encompassing principle: survival over pleasure. There is no room in your life for what your descendants will call comfort food. Food is not a source of emotional solace or creative expression. It is a tool. The relief you feel after a meal is the primal relief from the pain of hunger, not the gentle, satisfying pleasure of a delicious dish. To face this reality day after day, the same textures, the same bland flavors, the same pot, requires a kind of resilience that is difficult to comprehend. It is a psychological fortitude built on the understanding that survival itself is the only feast that truly matters. Imagine taking your lunch to the fields. It's not packed in a container. It's a hunk of bread, a wedge of hard, crumbly cheese you might have made from the milk of your single cow or a few goats, a raw onion, and a flask of weak ale. You sit under a tree, your back aching, and consume this simple, portable, functional meal. Hundreds of years from now, People will pay £15 for this in a pub and call it a plowman's lunch, romanticizing it as charming and rustic. They will have no idea it is simply whatever you could carry that wouldn't go bad, the starkly practical meal of a laborer. This quirky tidbit, the ghost of your lunch surviving as a quaint pub classic, is a testament to how profoundly the memory of this hardship is buried in the culture of the future. Your life and your diet exist in a state of precarious balance. But this entire system, this world that has seemed so static for centuries, is destined for a cataclysmic upheaval. In the middle of the 14th century, a great pestilence arrives from the east. The Black Death sweeps across Europe, and in a few short years, it wipes out a third or even half of the population. It is an unimaginable catastrophe, but for the peasants who survive, it changes everything. With so many dead, labor is suddenly in short supply. Your work is now more valuable. Land is more plentiful. The rigid bonds of serfdom begin to crack. In the generations that follow the plague, survivors find themselves with more bargaining power, higher wages, and access to more and better land. For the first time, many peasants have enough surplus to afford more meat, to eat better bread, to vary their diet in ways their ancestors could only dream of. The Great Plague, in its horrific way, spells the beginning of the end for the very diet we have been exploring. But as you live and breathe, that future is unknown. You are simply trying to make it to the next harvest. Socioeconomic historians debate the overall impact of your diet on the great sweep of history. Was it a story of remarkable human resilience and adaptation? A diet that, while monotonous, was sustainable and sufficient to fuel the slow growth of a continent? Or was it a story of chronic malnutrition, of stunted growth and tragically high infant mortality, a dietary trap that held back demographic and economic progress for centuries? For you, it is both. It is a story of survival, but that survival comes at a steep price, paid in the health of your children and the endless ache in your own bones. Your world is a closed loop of labor and food. You wake in the smoke-filled hut. You stir the endless pottage. You eat the gritty bread. You work the Lord's land to grow the grain for that bread. You tend your garden for the turnips and onions. You endure the fasts with salty herring. You celebrate the feasts with humble offal. And you wash it all down with the liquid bread of your ale. It is a life of profound hardship, a diet of stunning monotony. And yet, it works. It has to. This simple, practical, and deeply human system of survival is what sustains the great laboring classes of an entire continent. It is the fuel that builds the castles and cathedrals, the energy that turns the millstones, the resilience that ensures there is a future at all. It is the quiet, unsung, and deeply personal taste of history itself. And now, the journey back from that small, smoke-filled hut begins as the world of the past recedes like a landscape in the mist. The feeling of the rough wooden spoon in your hand begins to fade, replaced by the softness of the pillow beneath your head. The pungent, earthy smells of the pottage pot, the sharp scent of onions, and the damp soil of the garden all gently dissolve into the familiar, quiet air of your own room. The constant, gnawing concern for the next meal, the deep-seated worry about the harvest and the winter stores can be released now, allowed to drift away on the slow tide of your breathing. You leave behind that life of endless, aching toil, a life dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the turning of the seasons. You can feel the profound comfort of your own time and place seeping back into your awareness. A quiet gratitude for the simple certainties of warmth, of safety, of a pantry that is not dependent on a single precarious harvest. The struggles of that distant soul were immense, their resilience born of a necessity we can now only visit in our thoughts. Let the story of their survival become a soft, distant echo, a reminder of the strength inherent in the simple act of enduring. Let your mind now turn away from the hardship and toward the deep, restorative peace of the present moment. As you settle further into the comfort of your bed, feeling safe and secure and ready for a night of truly sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.